Laudable Pursuit, a 21st century response to Dwight Smith. Part 2, The Place from Whence We Came, to call them on again in due season. The history of operative Freemasonry since the formation of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 has seen many changes. We began in taverns and pubs, and our meetings and degrees were celebrated with the festive board, with toasts and food and a camaraderie not found in any other society of its day. Freemasonry was a unique creation, unlike any other institution, in what was a rigidly prescribed social class system. Nobleman and commoner, landowner and shopkeeper, general and foot soldier could meet upon the level in this place, something they could not acceptably do on a city street. Political and religious differences that had torn nations and continents apart were left outside the door. Men from every class and religion, in what quickly became every corner of the globe, shared in common their degree experience in the lodge, and a charge to strive for nobler deeds, for higher thoughts, and for greater achievements. What became today's middle chamber lecture in the fellowcraft degree was an attempt by our forefathers to take good men and make them better. It was an admonition for a Mason to study the liberal arts, to take note of the orders of architecture, to scientifically observe the world around him. This was at a time when public education did not exist. Universities were places where only the children of the very rich could be found, and the notion of questioning religious explanations of natural phenomena could still result in heretical punishments in certain corners of the globe. The degrees of Masonry were conferred in many ways in the early days. A man could be initiated, passed, and raised in one night, or it could take up to a year between degrees. Multiple candidates were not uncommon for degrees, and early French and Belgian paintings depict several candidates receiving their Master Mason degrees at the same time. Other records show that members were sometimes required to present scholarly research papers in open lodge before being allowed to advance. As a result, entered apprentices were welcomed into meetings with open arms, and all lodge business was conducted on the entered apprentice degree. The design of the earliest lodges was such that membership seldom grew beyond 40 members or so. It was the intent that a mother lodge would give birth to daughter lodges when the membership rolls became too large. Lodges met in tents, taverns, hotels, and finally in dedicated buildings constructed especially as temples for the craft. Many lodges would meet in the same buildings. The object was for Freemasonry to grow by making new lodges of small size, and the reasons were simple. 20, 30, or even 40 men could know, love, and care for each other. The design was for smaller lodges to have a caring and connected membership. A lodge of 100 members was unheard of, and 1,000 was unthinkable. Lodges had very different personalities, not simply country or city lodges. Masons of like professions formed affinity lodges. Military lodges were quite uncommon and were instrumental in spreading Freemasonry around the world in an astonishingly brief period of time, while Europe embarked on 2 centuries of trade, war, and colonial expansion. To join a lodge meant that a man had come well recommended by Masons who really knew him to be a good, honest man, that he had been investigated thoroughly, that he would be a credit to his lodge, or there was at least a spark of potential that would grow within him by associating with men of good character. Lodge was expensive, so much so that dues or subscriptions would have to be paid at each meeting. In return, the Mason was treated to not a dinner, but a feast, with plentiful wine or ale for the 7 ritual toasts that accompanied the festive board. And it was just that, festive, lasting well into the night. Many lodges met on the night of the full moon, to assist the brethren in finding their way home on foot or on horseback in the dark. In less than 100 years after the birth of the first Grand Lodge, virtually every man, woman, and child in the Western world knew who the Freemasons were and what the order stood for. Masons were the elite of society, not in the blue-blooded, landed gentry sense of the word, but elite as in the leaders of their towns, the men of integrity, responsibility, and trust, whether they were presidents or doctors or coopers or smiths. This was the state of Freemasonry during the period of its greatest expansion. Small and exclusive lodges, hard to join, expensive to belong to, encouraging personal and intellectual growth wrapped in the mantle of charity and robust conviviality for all of its members of every degree. That which was lost. The wave of anti-Masonry that erupted in the United States and Europe in the early 1800s happened for different reasons, and with different results. In Europe, it was strongly alleged that Masons had fomented the English Revolution that deposed Charles I, then the French revolutions that turned the entire continent upside down with fear. Freemasonry went underground, resulting in feelings that it was a secret society, but lodges remained little changed. In America, lodges died off, membership diminished, and society turned against Freemasonry, especially after the Morgan Affair in 1826. Fueled by the sudden popularity and noisy promotions of the anti-Masonic Party, lodges closed by the hundreds, Grand Lodges went dormant, and the fraternity faced extinction. In 1843, the Baltimore Convention assembled Grand Lodge representatives from all around the country to bring uniformity to ritual and to develop new rules for governing lodges, and, hopefully, to recommend such measures as shall tend to the elevation of the order to its due degree of respect throughout the world at large. These were the beginnings of the dramatic changes for Masonry in the United States. Recommendations to standardize the ritual were passed by the delegates, keeping our ritual closer to that illuminated by Preston in 1788 than those our European brothers ultimately ended up with. Because of the fear that Cowans and eavesdroppers might join the fraternity, be initiated, view a meeting or two, and then expose Masonic secrets, it was decided to bar entered apprentices and fellowcrafts from participating in lodge business meetings. The results of this change altered much of what followed in the history of United States Masonry. By expelling the entered apprentices and fellowcrafts from participating in regular meetings of the lodge, the slow, thoughtful advancement through the degrees was abandoned. Time between the degrees was uniformly reduced from months or a year down to a week or even less. Masonic study was placed by the rote memorization of the Q&A lectures or catechism. The practice of meeting in taverns and pubs ended in favor of the construction of individual lodge halls or temples, and to afford those new buildings required more members. Masonry again began to spread throughout the country because of war. The Civil War introduced soldiers on both sides to the craft, and membership again began to grow. American Grand Lodges also became allied with the growing prohibitionist movements, and, one by one, most Grand Lodges outlawed the serving of alcohol in lodge buildings or at lodge functions, effectively removing the last vestiges of its tavern hall origins. After the Civil War, Freemasonry caught the wave of fraternalism that swept the country, and as the granddaddy of them all, Masonry became once again the preeminent fraternal order in a sea of moose, elks, eagles, red men, woodmen, and many others. A contemporary author noted, "The probable extent of the influence of secret society life may be inferred from the fact that more than 6 million Americans are members of 300 such organizations, which confer about 1,000 degrees on the 200,000 novitiates annually, aided in instances by a wealth of paraphernalia and dramatic ceremonials which rival modern stage effects." Albert E. Stevens, Cyclopedia of Fraternities, 1907. During and after both World Wars, an explosion of interest in the Freemasons swelled lodges to unheard-of levels. Size of membership and magnificence of temples became the forces that fueled the construction of expensive buildings in every major city. Pressured by members joining multiple clubs, rites, shrines, grottos, and other groups, lodge dues became artificially low to attract and keep new Masons. As long as membership ranks grew, the stagnant dues structure would not be a burden to the lodges. Masonry and its appendant bodies began a century-long expansion of institutionalized charitable good works, virtually allowing the charities themselves to define their mission.